Just give me an idea now. The name of your organization is?
I'm just a person. I'm not an organization. I used to be a reporter years ago. I worked in the business side of media. So I worked for U.S. News and World Report and Fast Company and National Geographic and PBS. And so I had good research skills, right? Solid research skills. So when the crash occurred back in September of '08, the news that we got out of Washington was that this was caused by homeowners who bought too much house. That somehow, they wanted walk-in closets and granite countertops, and they didn't deserve to have that. And as a result, the entire global credit markets went into a tailspin. And I thought, well, no. Right? That can't be true. So I started researching.
I mean, like, you really follow through with a stigma that most people were given as the result of the problem, and that it manifested from an interest of a livelihood more so than a need. We're here with Laura Walsh,
yes, Laura,
and who happens to be creditable in her interest in wanting to identify to where the problem exists when it comes to the foreclosure problem that we're having in this country. And it's not just a New Jersey or a Newark or a black people thing.
Right.
The idea of it has really culminated, obviously because of media attention or from the expectations of the big money investor, that the problem was challenging to those who couldn't afford it. Why do you think that it was necessary to get the kind of information that you've been able to manifest?
Well, I think education is key, right? And it's a lot of what you do here in your, in your cable operation. And I think this is, many people were overwhelmed, and there's an isolation when people, homeowners would apply for modifications after 2008. I believe the process is used to wear people down, right? So they'll just hand in the keys, right? But people don't talk about it. So one of the things we want to do is make people aware that it's not just people in, in urban centers. It's not just people of color. It really, in the state of New Jersey, it's a massive epidemic. People in Franklin Lakes have a higher foreclosure rate than many areas.
So it's not just poverty-stricken environments?
That's right. But the reason I'm working with folks in Newark is because these were predatory loans, meaning the companies that went into the marketplace in Irvington, in the Oranges, in Newark, they were predators, and they targeted the population, which I think is just abhorrent. So that's why I'm spending a lot of time down here, because I really feel that all of it was wrong, but it's particularly wrong what they did to the community here.
But now you're sharing with us that there have been affluent communities that have suffered from the hardship of the way this whole situation played out. Explain to me exactly, how does that fit in regard to the pattern of difficulty it is to try to overcome the problem when you have individuals that actually can't afford to have those kinds of homes?
Well, it's really interesting. I think the first premise is that all these homes were overvalued.
Oh.
Okay, and all throughout the country, from 1998 all the way through 2006 and 7, that they were falsely inflated. So it didn't matter if your home was falsely inflated to 150,000 or if it was falsely inflated to 1.150,000 million. Do you know what I'm saying? It's still inflated value.
Is there an explanation as to how that really culminated itself?
It is. What we found, and again, a lot of this is based on congressional testimony and facts that are in the public sphere, right? Back in 2006 and 7, the appraisers, independent appraisers, testified before Congress, and they had 8,000 of them signed a petition and worked very hard to show Congress that they were being forced by the lenders to artificially inflate the value of the properties. And if they did not give the number to a countrywide broker or to, any of the fly-by-night originators, they didn't work again, and they were blacklisted.
Wow.
So that's on congressional record, right? Wow. So we know that they were falsely appraised, that the value was inflated so that somebody would borrow X number of dollars. So say their house was worth $150,000, but the appraiser came in at $199,000. So you have $49,000 in equity. So the brokers were saying, well, we can give you that $49,000, and you can pay off your credit card bills, and maybe you can get some walk-in closets.
Yeah, this was supposed to be the deal,
right? So,
everybody
but that
$49,000 was getting a deal.
Exactly, but that $49,000 was false.
They never got the $49,000.
They got the $49,000, but the home wasn't worth $199,000.
So now everybody is thinking that they have benefited from a property transaction.
That's right.
But what they did was sink themselves deeper in debt.
Exactly. And these were written, we are convinced, it's my personal opinion, but based on the data and everything that I have looked at over a period of 5 years almost, is that this was purposeful. That the idea was for these large banks and investment banks, the Goldman Sachs, the Bear Stearns, the Lehman Brothers, the Credit Suisse, to grab as much money as they can out of the American public, and actually it was all over the world, but just talking about America, to grab as much capital as they could by falsely inflating, saddling us with the debt, knowing that those properties were never worth that and that it was going to crash. But when it crashed, they were long gone.
Wow. Now, the discussion that we're having is in line with a number of other problems that we've been having, privatization. It seems as if there's a unique interest in sabotaging, especially people who are in a situation where they're trying to do better.
Yes.
And then knowing that they're going to fail, and in their failure,
right,
it's going to cause this chain reaction where people are going to lose the value of everything they have. Even in education. So give me a step-by-step scenario or a timeline and how this all began to effectively happen. And did it have anything to do with the problem of terrorism in relationship to the World Trade Center catastrophe?
Yeah, I don't know that I could tie it into that, Herbert, but I think this, to answer your question, it occurred back in 1997, 98, is when the federal government, through Fannie, Freddie, and Ginnie, right, who back or guarantee the mortgages, who are supported by taxpayers and also private institutions, they claim. Okay, but that's how the funding occurred for many of the mortgages in the United States. So the idea was, let the Wall Street bankers use other people's money. Okay, they weren't using their own money anymore. Use other people's money to create these investments called mortgage-backed securities, which are, if you think of a mutual fund, right, or shares of stocks.
Right.
Well, mortgage-backed security is really a corporate person who doesn't pay taxes, who holds mortgages or shares of mortgages. That's what a mortgage-backed security is. And so that's where our pension money, that's where the insurance companies made their money. They would invest in these mortgage-backed securities. So there's so much money.
How was the return on the investment?
It's very high.
No, but how did they develop that, where there was a return?
Well, what they would do is based on people paying their mortgages. So they would say, Ozzie and Harriet always pay their mortgage. And they being, say, a Goldman Sachs or a Lehman Brothers or a Bear Stearns sales guy. And they would go to the pension funds, the United Federation of Teachers, New Jersey Carpenters Union, towns in Norway. And they'd say, Ozzie and Harriet always pay their mortgage. Do you want a stream? Do you want part of that? Do you want a piece of their mortgage? And they pay every month. You're going to get a return on your investment of X%. And that's where all the big money went.
I see.
Okay, all the pension money, all the insurance money.
Really?
Yes. So because it was so lucrative, they wanted to loan more and more money and write more and more loans because the investment banks were making so much money, and the investors, the pension funds, were doing pretty well based on the returns because people were paying their mortgages during that period.
Right. Okay.
And no one really knew the level of the fraud. There were inklings, but it wasn't acknowledged in any public forum until 2008. So does that make sense? Because so what you have is, so you have all these. So there's two victims here in what we call mortgage-backed security fraud, which that's what we talked about at the hearing. That's the thing. The mortgages never made it into the mortgage-backed securities, and that's what we uncovered in 2008. The markets froze because the Treasury, the federal government, learned when they looked through Lehman and Bear Stearns' books, and we've got this, it's all again in books and it's been highly investigated, is that there were no mortgages, that they didn't follow the careful steps under New York security law. So the investors, the pension funds, think they have, say, $100 million in mortgage-backed security. Well, that value of that investment is based on the amount of the mortgages. So if the mortgages never made it in to the mortgage-backed security, that fund is not worth $100 million. So that has huge implications for pensions.
Right.
Huge, huge, huge. The same thing with Prudential Insurance is one of the insurance companies who says exactly that. And we talked about it briefly at the hearing. They're suing, Prudential Insurance out of Newark is suing Goldman Sachs. And they did an exhaustive review, and they looked at about 10,000 mortgages that were supposed to be in the trust that they invested in. Mm-hmm. And they went to the county clerk's office, which is what we do. We could talk about this later. And they reviewed them, and they found that 40% of the mortgages never made it into the trust.
Really?
40%. And of the 60%, and of the 60% who did, 58 didn't do it the right way.
Really?
Really. So we know there's no mortgages, right? There's no mortgages to back the mortgage-backed securities.
Okay,
that is the fraud. And so that is why when people stop paying or ask for a modification, or even if they're paying and their escrow gets screwed up and somehow they fall into the foreclosure bucket, that happens a lot, that all these parties pop up. So they think of a Bank of America. They've been paying Bank of America. Well, suddenly Wells Fargo comes on the scene. We're like, well, who are you? I never had a transaction with Wells Fargo or a trust,
having that, right?
Or a trust name, and they have no idea who these entities are. Well, that's the fraud. That's bubbles up in foreclosure. So because they never carefully followed the steps required to get those mortgages and notes into the mortgage-backed securities, when people stop paying, all the fraud bubbles up to the surface. Mm-hmm. And so that's what robo-signing was about. They just said, well, we never expected so many people to, not stop paying or have trouble, so we'll just dummy up the documents. So that's what they did. That's what robo-signing was.
Robo-signing.
Yes,
dummied up the documents.
That's right, assignments of mortgage, and they would file them in the county clerk's office, assigning. Say you were paying Bank of America every month, and then suddenly there's an assignment of mortgage in the Essex Registry, and it says they're assigning the mortgage from Bank of America through MERS, which is a completely different show. MERS, which is this fake registry that they use. So MERS assigns it to a trust. Well, you can't do that under New York security law. There should be at least 5 other assignments of mortgage in between. But they know the courts need a piece of paper to foreclose. So they file those pieces of paper in the registry to dummy up evidence where none exists that they are the lender. And then they'll foreclose under the trust name.
Wow.
So that's what's happening.
So in the research and finding this information to be tangible, and in relationship to it, what I'm trying to follow you through with is that when the mortgage-backed securities were established, what were the percentages that they expected to get on the return of those investments?
That's a very good question. It varied based on risk. That's why they wrote, so you could get as much as 8 or 10% if you, as an investor, you took a risk that a lot of the mortgages there were high-risk mortgages, meaning, 100% of the appraised value, the people's FICO scores weren't so terrific. So you got a higher rate of return when the mortgages weren't as good, as solidly underwritten.
Really?
Right, and actually New Jersey pension funds today, that's what New Jersey invests in high risk in funds. Mm-hmm. So, because you get a greater return, you got to make up your money, right? Mm-hmm. So, and that's a legitimate risk, right? But the notion was that the other people that were low risk, AAA, because they were rated AAA, and only pension funds had to invest in AAA, products. Mm-hmm. They couldn't invest in BBB or AA, had to be AAA. So these mortgage-backed securities were rated by Moody's and Standard & Poor's and Fitch as AAA.
Making it an open door.
That's right.
For it to receive those kinds of monies immediately after it hit the market.
That's right.
And that's why the boom happened. But there was, so where did the shortfall in money come from?
It started, well, what was interesting, in 2008, when the Treasury Department learned there were no mortgages to back the mortgage-backed security, they pushed through TARP. Remember the TARP bill? And if you look at film, you'll see President Bush say, we're going to buy back the bad paper. Well, the bad paper were mortgages.
That never really materialized.
Right. The mortgages were satisfied.
Right. Okay.
So they paid off a lot of these funds. These mortgage-backed securities were completely paid off in 2008.
Wow.
Many of them. Because we look through the reports.
So that's wow.
We look through the reports, lots of zeros in.
But then they're still collecting the money on them.
That's right.
And forcing people out of their houses.
Right.
So I guess that's where you're talking about don't give up your keys.
Well, yeah, exactly. You have to. 94% of people in New Jersey do not respond to a foreclosure complaint. They never show up. So it's an automatic layup. And so people need to show up. You need to file an answer. You need to get into court. There are groups that are helping here in New Jersey, helping educate homeowners. We have Legal Services of New Jersey, Seton Hall, a number of really good people here in the community, in the Irvington area are really helping homeowners. So number one, you've got to answer. If you're foreclosed. Number two, if you've asked for a modification, understand that you're in the foreclosure bucket. And there's no way you're getting out. Okay, it's just a matter of time. If you ask for a modification, you place yourself in the bucket, and they will just string you along until the arrearages become so big that they know you can't satisfy.
Wow.
And you can't catch up, and then they'll lower the boom. Okay, it's a business model.
Right.
The other thing is people who have paid their mortgages on time are affected. Why? Because many of those robo-signers also signed satisfactions of mortgage.
Really?
When you paid your debt.
Right.
That is in the registry. Many attorneys and in New Jersey who are experts in property have told us that it's doubtful that the lien has been extinguished if you've paid your mortgage and you have a satisfaction mortgage signed by a robo-signer. So even though you paid the debt, the lien may still be existing. Do you understand what I'm saying? So it's everybody, right?
Wow. So there's a lot of backtracking that individuals have to do and really get involved into the legal process. There has been at least an effective manner in which the government itself is trying to help people overcome this particular problem?
It does. I think the municipalities like Irvington and Newark and others in the state have done more than the state has, right, of New Jersey.
Okay.
Because
locally.
Yeah, locally. So local government is most responsive.
In terms of educating people, now, what in regard to, now there are some standards, you're right, because there are some local groups and a lot of advocacy groups have been involved, and we're going to be talking with them soon. We're going to put together a number of ways in which we can raise awareness to the constituents in our community. Some of them have fashioned it to get ordinances approved in relationship to stop the sheriff sales, things on that level. Does that really help certain individuals who are not actually following through with the process because no one has really approached them?
Yeah, it's a lot for everyone to handle. Even if you're not an attorney, learning this is very difficult. So we certainly appreciate why 94% have not answered. It's really hard. But that having been said, we talked to the sheriffs in Bergen County. We met with their entire staff and the deputies, and our presentation, because there were a group of us at that point, but not a group, just people. And we said, look, the sheriff's departments are being used because you're following the judge's order, and I understand the judges make determinations based on the facts. Many people don't show up, right? But at that point, the sheriff said, well, the title is clouded on these properties. And I went through a sheriff's sale list from Bergen County and just could pinpoint there were trusts, there were these MERS organizations that had foreclosed. And I looked up and I said, they're not the lender. I could see from public records. So the sheriffs need to be educated about this.
Wow.
And so we're working on that, but if anybody could help us do that, we'd like to get into Essex, we'd like to get into all of the counties, because they're constitutional officers, right? And they swear an oath to the New Jersey State Constitution, right? And the United States Constitution. And property rights are integral to being an American and being a New Jersey citizen. Right. I mean, if you're behind on your, and we're not suggesting, oh, it's a free house. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that if someone's going to take your home, then in a legal procedure, then they have to prove that they're the real creditor. Right? Do they hold the mortgage? Was there any...
oh, wow.
You know what I'm saying?
So because of the whole charade, nobody's really holding it.
A lot of them aren't. Like, we found it to be specific. There was a loan that we looked at. It was a mortgage broker and a woman here in Essex County, and she had this mortgage, and I looked at it. Well, the entity went out of business. Was never licensed in the state of New Jersey to write a mortgage in its own name. So we give that, because I'm not an attorney, but we give that evidence to an attorney, and who turns around and then writes claims and pleadings and gets it into court. There's been others where there's a trust name, and we can go on to the SEC website and you look up reports for public trusts, and I find the name, and Countrywide, all the big ones are on there. So you look that up, and you can see, based on the reports, if what they're saying is true in the documents. And a lot of times it's not. So we have evidence.
What happens if you find that a lender does not exist any longer, or that...
You have to tell them, because many of these trusts don't exist anymore.
Okay, so if the trust doesn't exist anymore, what happens? Do you get the title? What happens?
Well, you have to. That's a good question. If you're in a foreclosure, you have to show that as evidence to to your attorney. Has to take that to the judge.
That the lender doesn't exist anymore.
Right. That has to be, in my humble opinion.
And then in most cases, has there been any research to find out how many properties are in that kind of situation, or does that person have to go there in order for that research to be done?
Well, that's again another very good question. I think we're asking that everyone audit the registries.
Really?
Yes. They're doing it in Texas, in Williamson, Texas. They had an auditor come in. I think they paid less than $25,000. And they audited it, and they found in the 80 percentile the number of property owners who had clouded title, where the documents were false. Because if people understand, these documents are recorded, and it's presumed that they're true because they're recorded. Because in the old days, people did what they were supposed to do, and if it was a recorded document, they made sure it was true. Okay? But what we're finding, the words on those pages aren't true anymore. But they still get the benefit of being called true true original documents that have validity, right? So what we want to do is go in and actually read the documents, because a lot of folks don't read the documents. A lot of the county clerks, that's not their job to read a document. It just isn't. So when you send an auditor in, they read the documents, and they pull, a sample, and they determine whether or not, if there were breaks in the chain of title, were there a number of these trusts illegally or unlawfully assigned mortgages. A number of these assignments of mortgage, they were an originator, say like Accredited Home Lending, went out of business and bankrupt in 2009. Yet I've seen a number of assignments where Accredited homes were taken out of Accredited and assigned to another entity, and that entity's employees were signing the assignment. So the entity doesn't exist anymore. It's bankrupt. It's gone. Most of them are gone. I know. This is a lot to process. This is like kind of an overview. Like when we help people, we break it into chunks.
I agree with you in terms of the processing part of it, because many people still have a fear that they have no recourse but to wait it out, and the longer you wait, the worse it gets. And what we're really trying to do in a tremendous way, is to give you an understanding that there are people and individuals and groups that are really out on the front line doing a lot of work in order to get the right answers. And I think that as we continue to build the kind of relationships that we are in regard to how we can be able to justify and then resolve many of the problems that people are having, it's very important that we realize who those groups are. Now, there is a group that you were involved with in Newark explain to me that group and how you got a relationship with them.
Oh, certainly. I've written it down because as you get older, you can't remember long titles. The group name is New Jersey Communities United. They're in Newark on Clinton Street. Lovely group of people. And I found them, I was working with someone from a union who had a cable show, and he had been putting me in touch here in Newark, down in Newark. And he called and said, you know, I've got this person I want you to meet at this organization that's going helping people. So we connected. And so what New Jersey Communities United does is they go into neighborhoods like Irvington. They spend a lot of time in Irvington knocking on doors, bringing people out of their homes.
Right.
And because so many people are ashamed and embarrassed and it's just an awful burden. And they get them to talk. And once they get them to talk about their situation with their home, then they bring them to a meeting, and then they show them how you don't have to be powerless, that the law, and this is really, I mean, there's a lot of detail here, but in my opinion and many other people who know about this fraud and how it worked, is that this really, what you're talking about is restoring the rule of law. Like, the rule of law has been completely annihilated, right, on so many levels. So that's the first thing. So, and then what they'll do is they say, okay, you know, we have a homeowner and they've been served, Laura, here's their paperwork. So what I usually do is ask someone to go down to the registry, pull their assignments of mortgage, satisfaction of mortgage, and their mortgage, and if they have a note, to bring that in. And then I just review it. And when I review it, I look for, again, not an attorney, but I've learned how to find fraud, because I've studied, you know, how it works, right? And so I've looked through hundreds and hundreds of these documents. So now I look through them and I can flag any inconsistencies, any questions. You know, does the entity exist? I do lookups, you know, on the SEC website. I also look at Delaware Secretary of State, where most corporations are registered. You know, we can pull reports. Are they still an entity? If it was a broker who wrote the mortgage, was the broker licensed in New Jersey? I contact New Jersey banking department.
Really?
Yeah, so it's all fact-based.
Let me ask you this question, so that it would be very proactive in regard to individuals that would be able to do some of the research on their own.
Yes.
Do you have a checklist or anything that people can be able to do before they come to you?
Absolutely. You know, and we can talk about that, but basically you want to see your documents in the registry for that mortgage or that, you know, that last refi, if that was what it was. Many people for the first time are looking. Also, a number of homeowners who go into the registry around the country and in New Jersey looking at their documents for the first time are finding that their mortgages were never they were never placed in the registry, which means they don't have a mortgage. I've had 8 people so far around the country who have said their mortgages were not recorded, and they've had title searches done, they've had to make sure, and they've been paying on a mortgage, and some of them are like offered modifications, and the mortgage is not recorded. So if you want any incentive at all, get into the registry and see if your mortgage is recorded.
If your mortgage is not recorded, what happens?
If your mortgage is not recorded, you don't have a mortgage. That's what attorneys have told us.
But then you really don't own the property. You can't. You got to get out of the property. I mean, like, where does the ownership of the property go?
It's still yours in New Jersey, and that's
but you don't have the title.
Well, yeah, because it's your house in New Jersey.
You don't have the title, though.
You do.
You don't have the title until the mortgage is paid off.
Well, if it's never it's the last deal, the one who's paid off. So say you refi.
Also, then you can really go and get your mortgage. You can go get your title, rather.
Right.
So,
well, you don't even have to go get it. You have it because the last one never existed. If it's not recorded, it never happened.
But if you don't physically have it, if you don't physically have the title.
Well, say you had Bank A and it was your originate with the first loan when you bought the house.
Right.
Okay, so you paid Bank A off when you refinanced with Bank B. Bank B never recorded Bank B's mortgage. Bank A is paid off.
Oh,
see what I'm saying?
My God.
Happening around the country. And I've seen it. It's not just an urban legend. I've worked with homeowners and walked them through because I was like, oh, you better make sure. You know? Whoa. If you don't think you're going to, just make sure. And many of them, one man in Hawaii, his was satisfied in 2004, and he's been paying all this time through June of 2012 when he was unemployed and had problems and he went to modification. No mortgage.
Okay, well, what we have here now is a great perception of where we need to begin to motivate individuals in our community to identify to some of those concerns. And one of those concerns is that a number of individuals are not following through with the foreclosure proceeding.
Right.
What can we do in terms of working together so that we can alert the community to come in with enough information that can get them some results?
Absolutely. We've sort of worked out this very good way to start, because all of this can be overwhelming, right? But we take it in chunks. So you get your documents from the registry.
Okay.
Okay, number one.
Number one.
Number two, there's something called the Qualified Written Request, which is a letter that's governed by federal law.
Okay.
And in it, you basically, I have a template. I'll give it to you.
Okay.
Right? They'll send that out to your servicer, which is the company that you pay every month for your mortgage, or the one that says they want a modification, or the one suing you, right, the entity. And you just ask, I want to see my note. I want to know who the owner of my note is. Please tell me. Okay. And under federal law, they have to within 30 days.
All right.
Okay. The next thing you do is send out a debt validation letter. Again, I have the template.
Okay.
Mail that out. In 30 days, they have to tell you, how they arrived at what you owe.
Okay.
Okay. When we have that information, many times there's nuggets there that we can pull together and put together a story. Because what I'm really doing is investigating, right? And then I help people. So then we take what they give us, and then we start, a lot of times, Googling who signed the documents. Who do they really work for?
Okay.
Did they work for that company when they signed that document? Are they flagged as a robo-signer? Very important in New Jersey to start flagging robo-signers.
Okay.
Okay, very important.
And we'll begin the process in relationship if we come in and apply. Laura, you're going to be on hand to help us when we put together the workshop?
Absolutely, absolutely. And we'll do it in chunks, right? And so people can do one task, and then they'll come back, and we'll coach, just like a coach.
And then we'll make it all work.
Exactly.
In the meantime, we're going to be in touch with you, and we're going to be putting more information on our website in relationship to understanding exactly how this whole situation is going to resolve itself. And with your help and with our support, I'm sure it's going to work out. Ms. Walsh,
thank you so much for the opportunity.
We'll be looking forward to another opportunity, and we'll continue to work in relationship to raising awareness around this issue. We are rebuilding the village, and we have partners that are going to be very actively involved with supporting us. And Mrs. Walsh is one of them. We're very happy that you're on board.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you very much. And thank you for watching.